An unseen alignment is forming in the currents of August, and its presence is sharper than most realize. The day that approaches is not simply another point on the calendar. It's the crest of a pattern that has been building quietly, almost invisibly, behind daily distractions. Subtle forces have been adjusting the rhythm of thought and emotion, pulling attention toward hollow matters while keeping deeper intentions locked away. This moment acts like a closing passage in a labyrinth. Miss it, and the exit may vanish. Has the weight in the air been noticed yet, or has the hum of routine made it fade into background noise? August 11th stands like a summit where certain currents reach their height. Energies that have worked in silence, siphoning strength and bending perception toward paths thought to be abandoned long ago. Its nature isn't to frighten, but to focus. This is not a storm to endure, but a precise hinge in time where the trajectory of events can swing sharply. It's a corridor so narrow that hesitation invites it to seal shut, while awareness allows a crossing. What stories will be written from this single point? Perhaps it is the kind of day that quietly rearranges the future, even for those who never sensed it happening at all. The instant a pause enters the rhythm, something unseen fills the gap. In moments like this, only those who can detect the quiet pulse beneath the noise are able to continue forward, even when the world around them insists otherwise. The current challenge isn't a random twist of fate, it has a root, and that root has been drinking from one's own reserves of life. The same energy that could be shaping new beginnings has been siphoned away, redirected into a loop designed to keep the spirit pacing in place. How many times has the same crossroad appeared in different disguises? If this spoke to you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more moments like this. Patterns of resistance rarely appear as blunt obstacles. They present themselves as the minor inconveniences that stack just high enough to block the view. A missed call, a sudden heaviness in the body, a surge of irritation from nowhere, individually harmless, collectively precise. This isn't the clatter of disorder, it's the choreography of interference. Its aim is subtle, to ensure the awakening of certain potentials never reaches completion. Notice how well it imitates coincidence. There is no need for direct destruction when constant diversion will do. The design is elegant in its cruelty. Keep the hands occupied with tasks that don't matter. Keep the mind so full of trivial noise that the deeper signal is drowned out. In this way, the inner compass remains uncalibrated, forever spinning but never settling. And just as the moment arrives for clarity to strike, another carefully placed interruption slips in. If this has happened before, what makes this time any different? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing the hand that built the maze in the first place. There is a place within the mind that interference cannot reach, a silent chamber where intention takes its first breath. In the moments after waking, the earliest thought to emerge is not a random flicker. It is a spark that shapes the tone of the entire day. That single fragment of awareness acts as a seed, and the soil it lands in will determine what grows. This is why the dawn is never neutral. It is the moment when direction is set before the conscious self has even taken full shape. Have you ever noticed how a morning's first mood can echo hours later without being questioned? The curious thing about this initial thought is that it often arrives disguised as one's own voice. A quiet suggestion, so casual it seems harmless, can pull the day into a slope without being noticed. Weariness, defeat, or resignation rarely announce themselves as enemies. They drift in softly, carrying just enough weight to bend the spine of the day before it has a chance to stand. It is not the intensity of such messages that makes them dangerous, it is their subtlety. How often has a whole day been lost because of a feeling that began in the first minute of waking? When an external influence seeks control, it does not always aim to break willpower outright. It simply aims to speak first. The mind, still half-formed from sleep, is most pliable in that brief window. A suggestion planted here can quietly overwrite the day's course. The strategy is not confrontation, it is preemption. A single whisper at the right moment can shape hours of action and perception without requiring further effort. This is why the earliest message matters far more than most realize. Resisting this intrusion is not about battling the thought or proving it wrong. It is about refusing ownership. The simplest act of saying inwardly, or aloud, "That doesn't belong to me," can dissolve its hold. Such a refusal is not an exercise in optimism, it is an act of sovereignty over the emotional compass. And perhaps this is where the real power lies, in the recognition that a thought can appear within the mind without being of the mind. How many such thoughts have been mistaken for truth? There is a difference between influence and authorship. A day steered by an outside signal carries the texture of someone else's intention, while a day shaped by conscious choice bears the imprint of its true origin. Deciding which to follow is not a matter of chance. It is an act of deliberate authorship. In this light, the first thought of the day is less a mood and more a proposition, one that can be accepted or declined. Which proposals have been accepted without a second glance? The inertia of routine often allows these early messages to pass unchallenged. Autopilot takes over, and the day unfolds according to a script written before breakfast. This is the quiet danger, allowing a single unexamined moment to become the architect of the next dozen hours. And if tomorrow carries a sharper edge of interference, the cost of drifting will be even higher. Imagine how much of life has been lived under the guidance of a voice that was never truly one's own. Yet there is always a point, small, quiet, but unmistakable, where interception is possible. It may feel like the stillness before stepping onto a different path, a moment that seems too small to matter yet holds the potential to redirect everything. The choice made here is rarely dramatic in appearance, but its consequences are. A day claimed in that moment feels different in the body, as if the air itself has shifted. Has that shift ever been noticed before? Some will ignore this window, dismissing it as trivial, and find themselves wondering later why the day feels heavy, misaligned, or strangely hollow. Others will catch it, stop it, and replace it with a thought that carries strength rather than depletion. The difference between those two paths can be traced back to a decision made within seconds of waking. It is remarkable how much rests on so little. In the end, the first voice is never the only voice. It is simply the one that tries to speak before awareness rises. The true measure of control lies in deciding which voice will be allowed to shape the day. Tomorrow, as with every day, there will be interference. But there will also be that brief, fragile space where interruption is possible. And in that space, the story of the day can be reclaimed before it even begins. Sometimes, all it takes is a single, precise interruption to alter the trajectory of an entire day. This shift rarely comes wrapped in ceremony or complex routines. It emerges in the small, unassuming choice to step in at the first possible moment and redirect the current. Alignment begins here, in the unnoticed details, before momentum can lock in and the day becomes an echo of the days before it. It's surprising how one decision, made quietly at the start, can ripple through every interaction and thought that follows. The conversation with the deeper self is often left unanswered, not because the connection is broken, but because fear is allowed to pick up the receiver first. Real guidance does not hide, it waits. Yet the invitation must be made in a way that bypasses hesitation, direct, without performance, without treating it as a ritual for special occasions. Imagine speaking to a trusted friend, one who holds a map you cannot yet see, and realizing they have been waiting for the call all along. That presence within does not require elaborate settings to respond. The channel opens with sincerity and a clear request, not with conditions or control. Words spoken in the mind or aloud work equally well if they are honest. A simple acknowledgement, if there is something vital, make it unmistakable, is enough. The point is not to dictate the shape of the answer, but to allow it to arrive in its own form, knowing that what is meant will find its way through. When the response comes, it does not usually wear the mask of mystery. It arrives in repetition, symbols, names, patterns that appear again and again until they are recognized. The mind often expects divine direction to feel grand, yet the deeper current moves in familiar, even ordinary, rhythms. This is its strength. It keeps speaking until it is heard, without forcing itself over the noise of doubt. Recognition requires attention more than interpretation. Many overlook these signs because they seem too simple to be significant. Yet the simplicity is intentional. Complexity creates distance. Repetition ensures the message cannot be missed by those willing to notice. The moment acknowledgement is given, a quiet shift begins. The design of events starts to bend toward that awareness, not because it suddenly appeared, but because it was finally seen. Overthinking is where the thread is often lost. Once the line is opened, there is a tendency to question whether it was done correctly, as if the inner self measures worthiness by technique. This is where interference re-enters, not through direct opposition, but through a slow drip of second-guessing. Clarity slips away when the mind insists on dissecting the experience instead of living it. Trust is the anchor here. Once the channel is engaged, the work is not to manage it, but to remain receptive. Guidance does not compete with fear by volume. It simply waits for the space to speak again. It's a steady presence, not a fleeting spark. The real skill is holding that space open long enough for its rhythm to be felt without interruption. In this way, the distance between uncertainty and alignment is remarkably small, often just one choice apart. One moment of clear invitation, one decision to listen without interference, can tilt the day toward clarity. That distance is not measured in time but in willingness. How many times has such a moment passed unnoticed simply because no one thought to ask? Once the invitation is made, the pattern begins to reveal itself, not because the plan suddenly exists, but because perception has shifted enough to see it. What unfolds next is rarely instant or dramatic, yet its precision becomes undeniable over time. The first sign will return. The second will reinforce it. And before long, the direction that once felt hidden will appear, as though it had been waiting in plain sight all along. Some moments demand a level of self-preservation that goes beyond social etiquette. This isn't withdrawal for its own sake, it's the deliberate safeguarding of energy when the atmosphere carries a sharper edge. Not everyone in proximity is meant to remain in the circle when the current shifts. The truth is less about affection and more about frequency. There are those whose presence quietly pulls the plug on the very source that fuels momentum. Have you noticed how certain interactions leave the spirit lighter, while others feel like stepping into a room with the air removed? These drains rarely announce themselves with hostility. They can arrive wrapped in familiarity, sometimes even affection, yet leave behind a heaviness that seeps into thought and mood. It might be a lingering conversation that goes nowhere, or a subtle tone that unsettles without clear reason. On days when the field is already tense, such encounters take more than they give, and the cost is paid in clarity and stamina. What makes this dangerous is how easily these moments are dismissed as harmless. When the inner landscape is under pressure, perception becomes more porous. The smallest injection of drama, complaint, or circular talk can tilt focus away from the guidance that was on the verge of breaking through. These aren't harmless coincidences, they are timely diversions. The ones who thrive on stirring or absorbing energy often seem to appear exactly when the signal is strongest, pulling attention just enough to muffle it. Boundaries, in these instances, are not a wall, they are a filter. The most effective are short, courteous, and absolute. There's no need to provide lengthy explanations for silence or absence. Doing so only reopens the very exchange that needed closing. A concise acknowledgement followed by disengagement is both efficient and protective. Energy doesn't require justification to be preserved, it only requires decision. Guarding space, even for a single day, can mean the difference between catching a crucial thread of insight and missing it entirely. The task isn't to sever every tie forever, but to recognize that some connections are too costly when precision is required. Those who truly value the bond will understand pauses. Those who don't will reveal themselves in the absence of access. Signals of interference often arrive in whispers before they appear in full force. Small, instinctive reactions, a sudden unease, a physical tightening, are early alerts. They may be ignored for weeks, but the day comes when these alerts amplify without invitation. The language of intuition grows louder until the choice becomes impossible to overlook. Have you ever noticed how the body knows before the mind agrees? In these moments, logic will not always keep pace with awareness. The deeper guidance may advise a change of course without offering an immediate explanation, and this is where many falter, waiting for proof before acting. Yet the truest compass doesn't explain itself in advance, it simply points and expects trust. The difficulty lies in the human tendency to override inner counsel for the sake of appearances, harmony, or the hope of maintaining old patterns. This is not weakness, it's conditioning. But on days when the stakes are high, ignoring that quiet direction can turn subtle detours into complete derailments. There's a cost to postponing trust. Ultimately, the voice within is less a suggestion and more a strategy, a system tuned to detect what the conscious self cannot yet see. When it calls, it is not asking for debate, it is alerting to unseen thresholds ahead. The ones who cross safely are rarely the ones with the loudest plans, but the ones who had the courage to act the moment the signal came. There are moments when a quiet instinct interrupts the ordinary rhythm, urging a step back without offering an immediate reason. It could be the sudden choice to leave a conversation unfinished, to hold off on a decision once thought urgent, or to retreat into solitude with no clear explanation. The logic may be absent in the moment, yet the sense of steadiness that follows becomes its own form of confirmation. True alignment is often recognized not by the absence of challenge, but by the return of inner stability, by that subtle restoration of balance that only comes when the right path is chosen before the mind can argue it away. On certain days, the internal compass speaks more plainly. When something feels strained, it usually is. When the pace feels unnatural, slowing down is the correction. When an action feels like it must be forced into place, it rarely belongs there. The world is filled with subtle broadcasts, signals not in words but in atmosphere. The question is never whether they exist, but whether they will be caught in the present or only understood after wandering too far from center. Defying an invisible rule has less to do with rebellion and more to do with remembrance. Many live by agreements they never consciously made, ways of speaking, dressing, or thinking that were adopted without examination, carried forward because they felt safer than questioning them. Over time, these unspoken contracts shape behavior so completely that the original self becomes difficult to trace. What is it like to realize that some of these rules were never truly one's own? There are rare windows where the unseen structure of these habits becomes more visible. On days of heightened clarity, a particular kind of leverage appears, an unspoken invitation to step beyond the lines drawn long ago. Every construct, no matter how enduring, has a point of exit. Yet not all choose to walk through it when it opens. Recognizing such a moment requires the willingness to believe that the familiar can be left behind without losing oneself. Breaking a silent rule does not demand recklessness, it requires precision. The act can be as simple as wearing something unconventional, voicing an opinion usually kept silent, or withholding words where they are habitually offered. It could be declining an obligation that no longer holds meaning, or saying yes to something irrationally joyful. These gestures do not necessarily alter the world outside, but they alter the internal alignment, reminding the deeper self that it still directs the script. The aim is not to attract attention, but to let action mirror truth. Moving outside the safe zone signals, both to the world and to the subconscious, that the days of shrinking to fit are over. In this space, the performance ends, not because others no longer expect it, but because the spirit no longer consents to play the part. The shift is less about display and more about reclaiming authorship over one's own existence. Choosing not to conform to a rule that has outlived its purpose is a message to every level of the self. The identity is no longer dictated by approval or inherited patterns. This choice, repeated in small but deliberate ways, reshapes the inner architecture. It becomes a private declaration that the space between authenticity and action will no longer remain unbridged. This practice builds trust with the inner guide. Every time a rule is left behind, even in the smallest way, the mind learns that the world does not collapse without its protection. What remains instead is an expanded horizon, proof that the limits were not fixed walls but painted scenery, dissolving the moment they were touched. Over time, these moments gather into a pattern, and the deeper rhythm becomes undeniable. What once seemed like isolated acts of defiance reveal themselves as the groundwork for a new way of being, one that is guided less by fear and more by an unshakable clarity that does not need to be explained to anyone but the self. And perhaps that is the most liberating truth of all. There is a language the body speaks long before words are formed, and it tells the truth about who holds the reins. The way it stands, the way it moves, the way it meets the room. It all declares allegiance, either to habit or to freedom. A subtle shift in stance, in breath, in presence, can rewire the relationship between thought and reality. One deliberate movement can remind the whole system that it is not here to be bent by fear or shaped by the echo of the past. And in that moment, something opens, a crossing into a version of life that no longer fits inside the walls once thought permanent. The machinery of urgency has a single purpose: to push decisions before discernment has time to intervene. Almost every poor turn begins in that pressurized space where there is no pause to hear what the deeper self would choose. The pressure can come from deadlines, from expectation, from the desire to prove worth by speed. It is in those moments that timelines bend, not toward the intended destination, but toward the loudest demand. Has there ever been a time when rushing truly delivered the clarity that waiting could not? True influence moves at the rhythm of its own design. It does not sprint to keep up with the noise of the day. And on days when the air itself feels tense, when sound and movement pile on faster than usual, this is the test. Urgency thrives on reaction. It seeks to make the mind forget its role as architect and settle for the role of passenger. In that forgetting, choices shrink and manipulation becomes easier. Slowness, by contrast, returns the helm to the rightful hands. Pacing life with intention is not withdrawal. It is precision. It is a refusal to enter a race whose finish line is not meant to be crossed. To pause when pressured is not defiance for its own sake, it is space-making. It's the quiet reassertion that action will happen, but not at the expense of center. A choice born from stillness carries a memory that outlasts the noise that tried to rush it. There is no obligation to meet every demand the instant it arrives. Messages can wait, meetings can be rescheduled, conversations can be approached on a timeline that honors clarity over compliance. The measure of worth is not in the number of tasks completed before sunset, but in whether the tasks chosen leave the spirit full rather than hollow. How many things labeled urgent were ever truly unmovable? Presence cannot be maintained when the mind is dragged ahead of the moment. Precision cannot survive in the slipstream of someone else's schedule. Intuition requires silence between steps. Awareness needs the kind of breathing room that haste erases. The most aligned opportunities will not vanish because the pace is measured. They will meet that pace willingly, because they are meant to fit it. On days when the world spins too quickly, those who keep their own rhythm begin to notice what others miss. In stillness, signals appear, threads of insight too delicate to survive the pull of urgency. The ears that hear them belong to the ones who waited just long enough for the static to clear. The rest will call it luck, the listener will know it was timing. Choosing not to rush is an act of sovereignty over perception. It separates the choices born from fear of falling behind from the choices born from the truth of where one stands. And when that truth is honored, manipulation loses its foothold. Those who keep their footing while others stumble set in motion changes that ripple far beyond the moment of decision. The message, when it comes, will not shout to be heard over the clamor. It will arrive softly, often in the gap between one breath and the next, and it will land only for those who left enough room for it to exist. In the end, the calmest presence in the room is the one carrying the key, and the key is never given to the one in a hurry. Real strength doesn't hunger for an audience. When force needs to be displayed to feel legitimate, it has already slipped into performance. There is a common illusion, mistaking dominance in a moment for alignment in the whole. Winning a debate, stealing the focus of a room, proving a point, these can feel like triumphs, yet often they are fuel for the ego rather than nourishment for the soul. The satisfaction is sharp but fleeting, and beneath it lies a subtle depletion. There are times when the higher path is not to press forward for the sake of victory, but to leave while the advantage is still yours. Walking away while ahead is not retreat, it's mastery. True advancement comes when validation is no longer the currency of worth. The applause of others, the final word in an exchange, the symbolic crown, these belong to a stage that no longer serves the deeper work. Those who have tasted real authority know it doesn't beg to be seen. It slips out before the curtain falls, because the purpose has already been fulfilled. To step back from a win is to signal to the unseen order that worth is measured by alignment, not by public acknowledgement. And that kind of restraint creates space for the arrival of something far greater than the ego's applause. Breath still moving in the lungs is evidence enough that the mission remains in motion. Many move through life as if the ending has already been decided, as if chances have been missed beyond repair. Yet the very act of being here, in this moment, is proof of an open page. Existence itself is confirmation that the work is not finished. If the assignment were complete, there would be no more time to walk it out. The sensation of being overlooked or stalled is not always the mark of failure. It can be the preparation of a foundation not yet ready for its weight. The unfolding of purpose is not a passive drift through chance. It is an active design, a living architecture that demands conscious agreement. This alignment does not tolerate half-hearted consent. Many never step into it fully, not because they are unworthy, but because fear is louder than their own calling. The fact that there is still forward reach, still a spark of searching, means the essential thread has not been lost. To survive what could have silenced the spirit is its own credential. This meeting between message and listener is not coincidence, it's convergence. The timing is exact because it had to be. And here lies the invitation, to stop waiting for a sign that the moment has come, and instead declare it. The next chapter is not contingent on readiness, it is triggered by agreement. There is a version of power that moves without motion, a choice to remain still, to resist the pull toward constant action. Culture rewards the visible, the responsive, the tireless pursuit of solutions. Yet the deepest alignment often looks like pausing in the midst of chaos, allowing the storm to pass without stepping into its center. Stillness is not surrender, it is ownership of energy. Anchoring in calm is a refusal to measure value by control over every detail. In the quiet, there is no demand to prove, no performance to maintain. The task shifts from solving every perceived problem to discerning which currents are even meant to be entered. This kind of restraint is not apathy. It is strategy. It knows the difference between battles that advance the mission and distractions disguised as urgency. Peace, when chosen intentionally, is not escape but attunement. The rhythm of the deeper plan is steady, not frantic. It speaks in low tones, consistent enough to be felt but never loud enough to compete with noise. The pressure to act instantly is often the bait, the alignment lies in the pause. And in that pause, the question becomes clear: is this truly mine to carry? Choosing calm, even in moments charged with pressure, is a way of handing trust back to the structure that's been holding the path together all along. It is an agreement to let things unfold without force, to release the need for immediate resolution. In that release, there is a kind of confirmation, not from applause, not from visible victory, but from the quiet knowing that the spirit has remained intact in the middle of it all. And that, perhaps, is the real success.